Well, hello everyone. Here I was planning to come to you in a much more organized way, but right at the last minute, my internet went out. So you're getting me on my phone, which is not how I intended to do this. But I did want to come in. We talked about in the group, there were a lot of people talking about their experience with anxiety and wondering, why is this my experience? Like, why is this what my body does? And so here I am to have a conversation about what anxiety really is. I think it's really important that we understand this. So for those of you who are new to me, my name is Dr. Julie Tumoon, and I have a program called Thriving Health that I administer that is all about how we actually heal our body. So a lot of healing work is done very much so from the symptoms and not from the root, not from that beautiful level of the co-joined energy of what creates us and informs us and generates us. And yet that's the magical level from which energy and healing and restoration happens. So I have a process that I guide women through every day. But in the discussion with so many women, I hear about this problem of anxiety, and it destroys lives. I mean, it really can leave us paralyzed in so many places. I've had clients where that meant every day coaching themselves to get out of bed, coaching themselves to, take that step, coaching themselves to just show up in life. And that's why it's such a severe problem. Now, what most people never talk about with anxiety is that there's a couple of important facets of what's actually happening in the body. On one level, there's an organ relationship, and this is a Chinese medicine concept. So anxiety is an experience in Chinese medicine where the Shen, the spirit, is not staying in a quiet space where it can connect at all levels and guide our highest functions and guide us along our way. Now, the Shen or the spirit is a heart-associated experience. In Chinese medicine, that Shen is stored in the heart, exists in the heart, it's the abode of Shen, let's just say. So that heart network is key. Now, the terrain of the heart, in Chinese medicine, we're not going to talk about the heart the same way that your Western doctor might, where they start talking about, cardiovascular function and cholesterol levels and all of those things, because it is a much more dynamic organ. And it relates to our emotional experience, and it relates to the element of fire in Chinese medicine and the ability to be grounded and present and clear thinking. Now, if the heart is disturbed, whether that is from that same Chinese medicine perspective, too much heat, whether it's not getting nourished, then our consciousness finds the environment uncomfortable. So that heat environment, that's one of the biggest ones, that people suffer from heat blasting the heart. Now, what that does is I want you to imagine, have you ever been in a room that's like too hot? Like it's just so hot and especially like artificial heat, like where you're in a room where someone turned the heat up too high and you're just feel like you're gonna like get out of your skin if it doesn't change. You can't quiet and you can't cool off. And so you start to feel that sense of like, I gotta get out of here. Well, it's kind of what it's like for your consciousness if there's heat blasting the heart. That Shen, that spirit is like, I gotta get out of here. And so what does it do? It kind of like ends up being out here, like not connected to our body, not in us. And then that's the experience of disconnect is one of the reasons why we feel the experience of anxiety. So in order to remedy that, we have to be able to quiet that fire. You'll notice nowhere in here was that a discussion of the neurotransmitters or of needing, or even in some cases of emotion. And we'll get to emotion in our conversation, but I just want to really point that out, that this is a physiological experience of like a patterned disruption of the communication of the organ systems. Now, the heart gets its nourishment from the spleen in that Chinese medicine model. This is really important. The spleen is the earth network in the body. Now, that means that it is responsible for the alchemical transformation. I know a lot of these are words, and I'm going to talk in ways that maybe some of you have never heard, but that alchemical transformation is taking what we eat and being able to turn it into and grab out of it like the inherent life force. So, you eat a carrot, it has information for your body. You eat broccoli, you eat a piece of fish, it has information. It has literally stored information, vitality, energy for your body. It is the spleen's job to be able to take that and differentiate, what we need and what we don't need. Now, here's the kicker. The spleen is injured by sitting and thinking. Think about our life in the West, man. All we do is sit and think. I mean, we ruminate on everything. We're all constantly like worried. We're thinking about tomorrow, 2 weeks from now. What about 6 months from now? What's going on over here? The world is fraught with things that we worry about perpetually. And I would say modern time is probably just such an accelerated version of that. It's kind of crazy. So the spleen, if injured, if weakened, well, then it can't do the differentiation the way it needs to. So that differentiation doesn't happen, which means it can't separate, from our food. It's not doing a great job of separating what we need and what we don't need. Bigger than that, it can't cultivate and grab what the organs need to be able to be nourished. Now, this matters because the spleen sends that nourishment up to the lungs and to the heart. So if the heart is not able to get what it needs because that spleen system is weak and that earth network can't do the alchemy, then the heart isn't going to be able to sustain its vibrance. It's not going to be able to be a good home for the spirit, for that Shen, and it's going to struggle. And then this is a huge reason why that anxiety comes in. So that weakness at the spleen can perpetuate weakness at the heart, which can actually lead to the experience of anxiety in the body. Now, the liver can play a role here too. So the liver is a wood network organ. Now, in Chinese medicine, the image there is like bamboo. So we're talking, all wood is associated with the liver network, but we're talking like bamboo because that image is wood that is flexible and dynamic. It can bend, it grows tremendously fast. I mean, it is this balanced network that is associated with this movement in the body. The wood network is what moves your blood. It is what controls your tendons. So think about how important tendons are, right? Like if they don't know how to send the message to contract, you don't move. Think about when people get really stiff and they have pain syndromes and those tendons are tight and painful. They don't move. Now, the liver network also has the personality of being like a general. And it has that personality for a reason, because your consciousness, that consciousness stored in the heart, it creates the master plan. Think of like the wise sage. So y'all have a wise sage living in your heart, and it knows and wants to hatch like the most beautiful plans for your life ever. And it wants to do it from a place of consciousness and being settled and being aware and being present. And it can't do that if it's blasted with heat or with energy that it can't sustain. Sorry guys, I'm gonna try to prop this up so I don't start shaking. And so if the liver network is out of sorts, like let's say you live a life that's really stressful. Let's say you're managing a million tasks. Your job is like that. Maybe your job is like a taskmaster job. Maybe you're a project manager. Maybe you're a doctor. Maybe, you have your kids or your household has a lot of management, whatever. If that liver network gets engaged in a way where it never gets a break because you're always on task, because there's always a million things to do. You've always got that I should do list. Then the liver network gets tight, and that tight creates friction, and that friction creates heat, and that heat can blast your heart because the liver is an upward moving. Now it's kind of like in that case that the liver, the general ends up in charge of the country. No one wants the general in charge of the country. We want, the terrain to be governed by a wise sage, not by a force governed to rapid movement and force. And so if we have liver disruption because we don't have that balance, because we can't maintain that function, then what happens is then the liver blasts that heart with heat. And the same thing happens. The consciousness is like, oh, I can't be comfortable here. I have to get out of here. And again, it kind of separates. Now, that perpetual separation and lack of nourishment means that that system isn't able to stay balanced. What happens, I assume some of you, just think about it. Have you ever been separated from a group? Like maybe you're in the middle of the woods. That separation sensation is automatically anxiety evoking. So think about if your organs are existing in that place perpetually, then we're going to have that perpetual experience of that anxiousness, that separation, and that separation is palpable. Now, the funny thing is that you'll notice we still haven't gotten to emotions. Like it's the sense of separateness and the organs not being nourished, and the organs not being able to self-regulate, and the organs not being able to do their job the way they need to, that is creating the experience. And this is something I think we don't talk about enough. I have many friends that are psychologists, but I'm going to say in all honesty that a lot of psychologists are so fascinated with the experience that they're like so stuck in the story of people's lives that they've never even considered that there's a body relationship, that this could be organ networks that aren't being nourished, or organ networks that can't communicate and mutually support each other, because that's what your body is. It's a collection of systems that have a rhythm to mutually support each other and to keep ideal function and flow happening. And when that gets disrupted, we have experiences, and anxiety is one of those experiences. And so on that end, like that's the Chinese medicine model, and it's so important because it bears so much on our experience. Now, we can look at this from a cellular model as well. So, we talked about the spleen and this nourishment, not getting what we need, not being able to keep that balanced. On a cellular level, what that turns and we experience it there as is a lack of cellular energy and self-governance, because that's really what happens. If the cells can't sustain proper energy level, there's no one really governing the ideal function at that cell, much like when we talk about the organs, right? So if that happens, the cell systems have to go into survival mode. And that is literally true. You have energy production models at the cell that are based off of thyroid and glucose and sending all these great messages that produce massive amounts of energy and keep us balanced and keep the rest of the system running effortlessly, right? But if we're running in stress mode, so think about that liver network, what I was just talking about. I have a million things to do. It never ends. There's always another task. I should do this. I should do that. I have to manage 15, people and all this. That model generally evokes stress response. If we haven't had a nourished spleen in a long time, and there isn't enough fuel, and the cells and organs aren't getting what they're needing, then again, stress response. So we revert to the stress-based model of energy. Our body has, our body's magical, so it has a backup system. Of course it does, right? It has a backup system. And we turn to the backup system, and that backup system is based off of stress hormones. And the stress hormone's job is to allow us to actually drop into a lower energy state so we can sustain energy production for longer, because we don't need as much fuel to do it. So guess what? The more that we live in that state, the energy production of high energy, of vitality, of a peaceful life gets shut down. And we start running in survival mode. So the cells drop into low energy states. They are designed in that case to use very little energy, very little nutrients, to be able to make energy and use the stress hormones to propel the sense of having more than we have. It's meant to be used so you can run from a bear, but most of us live there. In this state, if it goes on and on and on, we're living under stress hormones. Well, I think every person here has been scared at least once in their life. Your heart beats faster, you can't catch your breath, your mind is kind of frantic, you can't coalesce your thoughts into clearly streamlined, easy to use methods. That's kind of the experience of anxiety. That's the experience of living in stress response. Now, we live here long enough, the body becomes, this is the normal. It has no idea how to get back to the path of using the high energy systems of thyroid and glucose and moving minerals and sending good signals. And it gets stuck here. And then what happens is you're running at a low level of stress response, and the body's so used to the path that that's where you get the bursts of it that come out of the blue. And this is what a lot of people with severe anxiety disorder suffer, is that they can be sitting on a couch and suddenly they're like fully in it. Like, where did that come from? Oh my God, the brain is running on the 10 scenarios, related to events in their life, or what could happen, or what the news just said, or whatever. And it runs out of control. And this is because at the root, those cell systems can't sustain balance. They don't have enough energy. They're actually running in a low energy survival mode. And the body doesn't know how to exit that state. You'll notice again, not a deficiency of Xanax, and not necessarily tied to one particular emotional event. It is a physiological experience where those organ systems and cell systems cannot run at their best level, and they're compensating. And a lot of us spend the majority of our life compensating. That's how we are living. We're compensating. And so anxiety becomes the experience. Now we tack on that. The longer we live here, and I can tell you, I've been at this a long time. I've never evaluated a woman who actually hadn't been living in that compromised state of survival mode at the cell level for at least 20 years. So for many, it started in their 20s. So we're living at this level. We're living at this state. The longer we stay here, there's biological change that starts to happen that makes the entrenchment even deeper. So it gets even more locked in. So on one hand, when we live in that stress state, we end up inadvertently creating a rise in copper throughout the body. Now, copper is part of energy production, but there's a whole sequence of events related to chronic stress and to low cell energy that result in copper accumulation, and it ends up actually getting sequestered in the tissues because your body's trying to protect you. But copper acts like estrogen, and we end up with a hyperestrogen state that will not show up in the blood. So testing your blood, in fact, in that case, your blood may show low estrogen. And that high estrogen state perpetuates the anxiety state. And so now your body's got low cell energy. It's got a copper problem in the tissues. Guess what? To go with copper, a lot of times we end up with other toxic metals hanging out there as well. These also contribute to the anxiety state. Now, the thing is that you can't go detox them, because to detox, you actually have to have cells that are running at an energy state that can sustain. Remember, we talked about the liver. So if that liver is on stress mode and it's running in a frantic pace and it thinks it has to govern the whole thing, you cannot go tell it that now it's got a detox, because detox is actually an energy state of a relaxed system, not of a frantic system. So we end up with a toxicity problem that actually creates enough irritation that also then adds to the anxiety picture, which is why we can see people have it kind of perpetually grow and grow worse as time goes on and shift and change, because you're actually adding more metabolic byproducts that create a bigger problem as time goes on, and your body is getting further and further away from the ability to resolve them. Now we can stack on that estrogen's balancing partner is progesterone. Well, guess what? Progesterone is associated with high energy cell states. It requires a liver that can conjugate cholesterol, that can take our nutrients and coalesce them and make this beautiful hormone. And so the longer we exist in that stress state, the lower the progesterone production gets in the body. Now, some people would say, oh, there's my key. I'm just going to go through, I'm going to use some progesterone. But the problem there is, to use progesterone, you have to have cells that can operate at a high energy level, which is why, in fact, a lot of women find, and I've seen this repeatedly, that they throw progesterone at the problem, or maybe their doctor does, and the anxiety gets worse. Well, the problem there is that you need cells that can sustain an energy rate that is high enough to support good function to be able to use that hormone. So you can't just go throw progesterone at the problem, because in many people's case, it's going to make it worse, or they have to keep raising the dose. And then they also watch other things like weight gain actually comes, and they can see sleep disturbance, etc. So because that root issue never got dealt with, we never addressed what was happening at the cell. How does it relate? Which organ systems are involved? How's the state of your spleen? What's being done to nourish that heart? What's being done to ease the liver? Now, as we go through all of this, we also find that we start disrupting the pathways of other nutrients in the body. So we disrupt the pathways of calcium and magnesium. Sometimes that means people need more, sometimes it doesn't. We disrupt the cell membrane function, the sodium potassium pumps on the cell membrane. The more exhausted our cells get, the more dysfunctional they get. They actually stop being able to transport nutrients effectively across the cell membranes. That's a really tricky spot, because then you can have nutrients available, but you can't get them into the cell. That's another whole level. And I do see that often, that someone's been in that state for so long that their body's not even getting things into the cell. Well, imagine what happens then. Like, if you can't get your base nutrients into the cell to regulate those functions, then you're also going to have even more anxiety and mental emotional anguish, because the cells can't even get their nutrients. What do you think happens? I mean, I'm sure someone here has been hungry before, like really actually hungry, maybe even because you did a fast and you were hungry. But what does that state feel like? It feels tense. It feels worrisome. It feels, anxious. That's part of that picture. And if your cells are in essence starving, even though you're well fed, I want to make that point. You can be well fed, you can be taking vitamins, and you can still have cells that are starving. But that's another big part of the picture, because at the root of it, it was because the cells couldn't take them in. They couldn't take the nutrients in, not because the nutrients weren't there, which is why at the root of it, these are the issues that have to be solved in anxiety. Now we can placate it, right? We can create numbness. That's what a lot of the meds do. They create the ability to cope by numbing us to the experience. They don't change the experience. They just create the ability to walk through life and not be, just being brought down to our knees by that experience. But at the root of it, they're not getting to that. So unfortunately, it's progressing in the background. Now, in order to solve it, there are some base levels. I think anyone who's listening can tell that it's complicated. It's really complicated, because what your cells are doing and how it relates, and is it more spleen or liver? How is the heart compensating? How is it impacted? What nutrients has it impacted? Is it at the level of your sodium potassium pumps? Is it at the level of copper accumulation? All of those things matter. They matter huge, and really need to be addressed, each one systematically, one by one, because if you want to resolve the picture on a base level, there are some very, things that everybody should be doing. Let's just put it that way. So on one hand, if you want to nourish the spleen, you cannot eat raw foods. I know some people don't like that one. What do you mean? My salad is the best part of my day, or I thought I was doing a really good job. The spleen does not like cold, raw foods. So if you want to nourish that spleen, you need to eat cooked foods, cooked vegetables, even cooked fruits. That is imperative. That's one major thing that you could do. You also need to be able to help your body have as much nutrient density as possible, and you need to have the substrates of energy production available. That means that you also need to make sure you're eating carbohydrates. Now, a lot of people are, doing low carb and various versions of keto and etc. In those models, you're depriving your cells of the one primary energy source they're looking for. They want to use glucose. The only way you use thyroid hormone is if you're using glucose, and making your body make it by going into ketosis is another stress response, and it is extremely challenging on the body. So you need to eat carbohydrates, and you need to have them throughout your day in order for your body to be able to use the knowledge that they contain and help shift that cell balance and help make those hormones. It has to be there. So ditch the low carb if you have anxiety, especially, but everyone should. You also need to have unobligated time. So there has to be some time in your life where there is no should on your list. You are not trying to get to one more task. You are not trying to do one more thing. You're not scrolling a phone. You're not responding to email. You're not checking out Facebook. Unobligated time is something of magic, and man, we struggle with it. I can't tell you the number of times I've had clients say, what do you mean do nothing? like I just said, to stand on their head for 4 hours a day. It's something that is essential, and we need to do that, because in that space of stillness, our body actually has the capacity to tap into some of that restorative potential in the body. And those organ systems, the heart, the spleen, the liver, and all the others as well. I mean, there's a kidney relationship here too, if it goes deep enough. They need us to spend some time in boredom and wonder and stillness. And so I encourage that for you as well. Yeah, Kelly, intermittent fasting can be a huge strain on the spleen, because the spleen, it depends on, for most people, they do it in a way that really damages the spleen. Leaves it in a fasting state. The longer you're in a fasting state, there's a normal fasting state. I mean, most people are not going to get up. I don't advocate anyone eat in the middle of the night unless in certain cases, actually, I've had people, it's the only way we could restore their cell energy, because they'd actually ruined their liver's ability to store glycogen so much that they actually did need to eat in the middle of the night. However, that is rare. The reality is, though, that the longer we go into fasting mode, the more our body has to produce the stress hormones in order to make energy, to raise the glycogen so our blood sugar doesn't drop. And in response, again, we've just taxed the spleen, we've just taxed the liver, we've just created an untenable scenario that we're running on stress hormones again. And so it's really important that we are paying attention to that. We are, what healing really is it's making it as easy as possible for our body to come back into homeostatic balance. Our body has a template for magical function. Like it has, oh my God, you were born in a miracle. Like, it literally knows how to heal, but we are the ones who interrupt it. We put our logic on top of these systems and we think that's it. I'm going to do it this way. And these systems are going, oh my God, like, how come you can't just work with me? That's part of what happens. And so, I think this is big with the spleen. We keep designing modes in the West to rein them in, like to get the body to behave, to control this outcome, control that outcome. And meanwhile, our organ systems are going, oh my goodness, could you please just, could you let me rest? Could I have regular food? Could we have some balance? That would be lovely. I mean, I really think that those are what the voices are saying, inside of our body. And the other thing is, so let's talk about feelings for a minute, because it's not part of the picture, but we have to work with our physiology too. So those organ networks we were just talking about, the heart, the liver, the spleen. So the heart is associated with the emotions of joy and the sense of calmness and spirit. The spleen is associated with the emotions of compassion or with worry, and the liver with anger or with kindness. These experiences of emotion that we have as we go through life, that I think we are very poorly taught to actually experience. I think we're more so taught to deal with, kind of that buck up model, like distract yourself. It'll be okay. Don't worry about it. Just move on. Hey, what can you do instead? It's like all these distraction and kind of minimizing models of the world. It's put us in a real state, because if we are not taught to feel our feelings, and to be able to feel them through our body, then they get stuck in those organ systems. So if we're not taught to have those experiences, then the organ systems get the responsibility for holding on to them. And that's another detriment. We get stuck in worry, we get stuck in fear, we get stuck in anger. It stays in our body. And those organ systems, it's like another toxin. I mean, it's just as detrimental as mercury or aluminum or any number, or copper, like we were just talking about. It's just as detrimental and just as impactful. So synonymous with meeting the needs of your physiology, nourishing those organ systems, getting them back to balance, meeting the needs of those cell systems, addressing those patterns, key to all of that. And this is something we work on with all of our clients for a long time, because it's actually quite a skill to cultivate, is really letting yourself have the experience of feeling the feelings as they move through your body and connecting with them, and learning to not intellectualize and be able to be present, and letting them experience themselves, so that you can actually no longer store them in those systems. And this is a big process, I really feel. And I think it's important, because at the root of it, anxiety is the disrupted experience of us being separate. And I believe our body is really divine. I believe that healing is a collusion with the force that makes us. Whatever word works for you there. Whatever word for God works for you. It truly is a collusion of us within our body with that force. And I feel that a lot of our illnesses are because we were never taught about the dynamic nature of literally our cells being elements of that divine expression and the magic that is therein contained. And as a result, we kind of end up going it alone. And things like trauma make that almost a certainty, because that's our response to trauma as a human, is that we pull back in protection, and it's not a fault thing. No one's at fault here. I mean, we have a model, I think, an accepted societal model that has us separate as with the way that things go. I don't think we're taught or given an example of how that collusive relationship works at a physical, biological level, all the way out to our spirit. And the more we go it alone, the more separate we feel, the more we have the experiences of that separation. Anxiety is one big one. There are many others. Pain, fatigue, exhaustion, worry, depression. They're all experiences of that. But we need to remember that inherent to the process of healing is to start to collude, to honor and know what those systems need, what they've been asking for, what they've been begging for, to be able to feed those cells what they need, to be able to replace the substrates needed so that they can put those biological pathways back into action and do it in a vibrant, beautiful way. Anxiety is completely healable, like 100%, if it's done this way, if it's done from that totality of you relationship model. Every woman I've ever worked with anxiety, who is willing to walk through the work and use the tools and ask for help and get support, their anxiety is healed, because they discover that it was multiple elements of them that needed attention, and that they hadn't ever been told, what the real goings on were. And once they learn to understand that, they can see it, and they can partner with their body, and they can follow, practices that let them actually be free, involving, food and movement and specific healing techniques and the nutrients that their body was missing, and working with feeling their feelings, and really step into that, grace of letting the flow of life move through them, and partnering with all of those organs so that they all can be at their best. That's what it's about. And certainly I think that's a sacred journey. That's why I regard healing the way I do. This is my divine calling, to be able to let women understand that we are powerful and our bodies are capable of magic. But sometimes we really do need to take the dive into what's really happening in that system, and not play at that surface, not dally with it, because, sadly, you can create food combinations that make this worse, that can plunge the cell energy. We were just talking about intermittent fasting, low carb. You can actually take nutrients that make it worse. If your cells are stuck in a high energy mode, that's not ideal, and you take a lot of B vitamins, it's going to make it worse. If you layer the progesterone on top of cells that are exhausted, you're going to make it worse. It's important that we are able to collude with our body. It cuts years off the process. So that is what I'm here for. And any of you who are really feeling that soul level calling of, oh my gosh, my body's been screaming at me and I want to partner with it, and this is what I'm here for, and I want to thrive and I want to be at my best, then, you are welcome to reach out, because that's exactly who I help. Those are the women I help. And just remember, watch this and really learn what those organs are doing and why they're doing it, and what your cells need and why you're having that experience. And no, it's not random. You're not flawed. You didn't do anything wrong. You just were never given the information. The template of how our world works doesn't honor the totality of how our body works. And you're a divine gift. I mean, you are magical, and truly can live that out in every possible way that you've ever dreamed, desired, and more. So I bless you all. You all are just magical, and I think just beyond amazing, and the world loves your gifts. So be kind to you, and if you are ready for that journey of healing where we work in this way, then you're welcome to reach out. I will happily support you. And just have a blessed day, guys. Blessings.